The Galactic Council chamber was silent as Ambassador Helen Carter stood before the assembled representatives of 47 alien species. Her hands were steady, but her heart was pounding as she listened to the verdict that would change everything for humanity. High Arbiter Zexthor, a being made of living crystal that reflected light in sharp angles, raised his hand and spoke the words that would echo through history. You have 30 planetary cycles to evacuate all human colonies from Council space. Your species has been deemed too volatile and too aggressive for civilized society. We have made our decision and it is final. Helen felt the words hit her like physical blows, but she kept her face calm and her voice steady when she responded. We came in peace. We honored every treaty you gave us. We contributed to the collective defense when the scourge came. We saved countless lives during that invasion. This is how you repay our loyalty and our sacrifice. Counselor Vresh, an alien with multiple tentacles that writhed with her emotions, spoke up with barely contained hostility. Your military capabilities exceed acceptable parameters for any single species. Your expansion rate across the galaxy is alarming to all of us. Your very nature and your history of warfare is a threat to galactic stability and peace. We cannot allow such a dangerous species to remain within our borders. Captain Jake Morrison was watching the broadcast from the bridge of his ship, the UNS Frontier, and his fists clenched so hard his knuckles turned white. Around him, his crew stood in stunned silence as they processed what they were hearing. Lieutenant Amy Hughes wiped away angry tears while Commander Peter Logan slammed his hand against the console hard enough to make the metal ring. Sir, we have orders coming in from Fleet Command right now, reported Ensign Chris Bailey in a hollow voice that showed his shock. All ships are to begin evacuation procedures immediately. All civilian transports are to be given priority over military vessels. Jake nodded slowly as his tactical mind began calculating the massive logistics of what they were being asked to do. How many humans are currently living in Council space right now? Approximately 42 million people across 17 different colonies, Amy replied with her voice thick with barely controlled emotion and rage. The evacuation began within hours of the announcement going out to all human colonies. Massive colony ships that had brought humans to these distant worlds with such hope and dreams now had to reverse their purpose and load families and possessions, and shattered dreams onto their cargo bays for the journey home. Children who had been born under alien suns and had never seen Earth looked back at the only homes they had ever known, with tears streaming down their faces. On the colony of New Boston, Mayor Linda Foster coordinated the evacuation with the precision of a military operation, despite the chaos and fear around her. Keep the lines moving and stay calm, everyone. Priority goes to families with young children and the elderly. We will get everyone out safely. Mayor, the Zenthari are offering asylum to any humans who want to stay behind on their worlds, reported Deputy Mayor Greg Patterson. Several families are considering accepting the offer. Linda shook her head firmly and her voice was resolute when she answered. Tell them we appreciate the gesture from our Zenthari friends, but humanity stands together as one. If we are not welcome in Council space, then we all leave together. No one gets left behind. The Zenthari ambassador Kaleth watched the human evacuation with a growing sense of unease that he could not shake. He had been one of only 3 council members to vote against the expulsion of humanity. Now, as he observed the orderly and dignified manner in which the humans departed despite their anger and hurt, he felt a deep sense of foreboding about what was to come. They are not panicking or begging us to reconsider, noted his aide Tivol with surprise in his voice. They are not resisting the order or causing problems. They are simply leaving. No, Kaleth agreed quietly as he watched another transport ship lift off. They are not panicking. They are remembering every slight and every insult. They are remembering this betrayal. Across all 17 human colonies, the same pattern repeated itself with mechanical efficiency. Humans packed their belongings and dismantled their settlements and boarded the ships that would take them beyond the borders of Council space forever. They left behind thriving colonies they had built with their own hands and terraformed worlds they had made livable through decades of hard work. They left behind the goodwill they had cultivated over years of peaceful cooperation, but they also left behind something else that the Council did not know about. A network of defensive satellites remained in place. Carefully catalogued research data on every species they had encountered was copied and stored, and detailed maps of Council space that would prove invaluable should anyone ever need them in the future were saved to human databases. Admiral Karen Wright coordinated the entire exodus from Earth itself, while watching holographic displays that showed thousands of ships making their way out of Council territory in long streams. Her second-in-command, Vice Admiral Scott Hayes, stood beside her with his jaw clenched in barely controlled anger. Total evacuation time is 26 cycles, which puts us 4 days ahead of their demanded schedule, Scott reported with professional precision. 0 casualties so far. All citizens are accounted for and no one is missing. Karen nodded with her expression grave as she considered the future. What about our defensive installations and early warning systems? Dismantled as ordered by the Council decree, Scott replied, though I personally made sure that every single officer downloaded the complete technical specifications and design plans before we pulled them down and left. Good thinking, Karen said with approval. They wanted us gone from their space. They are about to learn what that really means for their security. As the very last human transport ship crossed the border into independent space, Ambassador Helen Carter sat down to record one final message to the Galactic Council. She made sure her words were clear and her tone was measured and calm. You have made your choice and we have honored your decision as we honor all our commitments. We leave in peace as we came to you in peace so many years ago. But I want you to remember this day with perfect clarity. Remember that you did not defeat us in battle. You simply asked us to go away and we went because we respect your sovereignty. Remember that humanity offered you our friendship and our protection and our loyalty. What happens next in this galaxy is not our doing. It is yours and yours alone. You will face the consequences of your choice. The transmission ended and the final human ship disappeared from Council sensors. The humans were gone from Council space. The Council members congratulated themselves on removing a dangerous element from their civilization. And in the dark spaces far beyond the borders of known space, something ancient and hungry stirred from its long sleep, something that had been held back by human vigilance and human military might, something that had been waiting for this exact moment. The Void Swarm had noticed that the Guardians were gone. 3 months had passed since the last human ship left Council space and the galaxy seemed quieter without them. The Council members had returned to their comfortable routines and their endless debates about trade policies and cultural exchanges. Then the first attack came without warning and without mercy. The mining colony on Zelkor 3 never had a chance to defend itself or even understand what was happening. The distress signal barely made it off the planet before the transmission cut to static, and then nothing but silence. When Council peacekeepers arrived 6 hours later, they found nothing but debris floating in space and the scorched remnants of what had once been a thriving settlement of 12,000 Feltari, miners and their families. High Arbiter Zexthor convened an emergency session of the Council with unusual speed, and his crystalline form seemed to dim with worry. What do we know about this attack and who is responsible? Security Commander Draxel stepped forward and projected scan data into the holographic display for everyone to see. The attackers used biological weapons of unknown origin, but the molecular structure is familiar. The evidence suggests the Void Swarm has returned. A collective shudder ran through the entire chamber like a wave of cold fear. The Void Swarm was a name from nightmares and old history files. It was a plague that had nearly wiped out all galactic civilization 3 centuries ago. It had been defeated only through the combined desperate effort of every Council species, working together, and a weapon so destructive that it was immediately banned and destroyed after the war ended. That is impossible, Councillor Vresh declared, but her tentacles were trembling with fear. The swarm was completely eradicated from the galaxy. We made absolutely certain of it. The data does not lie to us, Draxel replied grimly while highlighting sections of the scan results. Furthermore, our deep space sensors have detected significant movement in Sector 7. We are reading multiple signatures that match historical swarm patterns from the old. Warkaleth rose slowly from his seat and his scales were darkening, with a terrible realization and growing concern. Where exactly is Sector 7 in relation to the former human colonial territories and their defensive perimeter? A star map materialized in the holographic display with glowing markers showing territories and borders. Sector 7 lay directly adjacent to what had been human-controlled space. More specifically, it was right next to the defensive perimeter that the humans had maintained for decades with their ships and monitoring stations. They were holding the line against this threat, Kaleth said quietly, but his voice carried through the silent chamber. All this time humanity was standing between us and the swarm, and we never knew it. They never told us what they were protecting us from. That is completely preposterous, Vresh snapped, but her voice lacked conviction. The humans said nothing about any swarm activity in that region. They would have reported such a significant threat to the Council. Did we ever ask them what they were guarding against? Kaleth shot back with unusual sharpness in his voice. Or were we too busy condemning them for being too well-armed and too vigilant and too prepared for threats we did not believe existed? The argument was cut short by multiple alerts blaring across the chamber as more attacks were reported. 2 more colonies were under assault. Then 5 colonies. Then 12 different locations across Council space were screaming for help. Within 1 standard week, the true scope of the crisis became horrifyingly clear to everyone. The Void Swarm had been gathering strength in the dark spaces beyond Council territory for generations. It had been held in check only by the extensive network of monitoring stations and rapid response fleets that the humans had quietly maintained. With humanity gone and their defenses dismantled, the swarm had poured through the gap like water through a broken dam. Captain Melissa Stone, formerly of the Human Defense Force, was watching the Council news feeds from her new home on Frontier's Edge. This was one of the colonies that humans had established beyond Council space after their exile. Around her in the community center, other former soldiers watched the reports in grim silence. "How long do you think the Council has before they collapse completely?" asked Lieutenant Paul Grant, while shaking his head at the footage of burning colonies. With their current military doctrine and defensive strategies, Melissa replied thoughtfully, 3 months at best, maybe 4 if they get lucky. They have gotten soft over the decades. No one in Council space has fought a real peer conflict in generations. So do we help them after what they did to us? Melissa turned to face her old comrade with a complicated expression on her face. They exiled us, Paul. They uprooted 42 million people because we were too dangerous and too militaristic for their tastes. Why should we lift a single finger to help them now? Because that is what humans do, said a new voice from the doorway. Colonel Danny Ross stepped into the room wearing a uniform that bore the insignia of the new Human Defense Coalition. We do not let people die just because they were stupid or ungrateful to us. We help because it is the right thing to do regardless of personal feelings. The Council will never ask for our help, Melissa pointed out with certainty. They are too proud to admit they made a mistake. They would rather die than ask us to come back. Then we wait until they finally swallow their pride and ask, Danny replied with a hard expression, but we start preparing our forces right now. Because when they finally break down and ask for help, we need to be ready to move immediately. Back in Council space, the situation was deteriorating with frightening speed every single day. The swarm was employing tactics that the Council forces had absolutely no counter for or defense against. They struck at supply lines with precision, isolated defensive positions and overwhelmed them, and destroyed terraforming stations to create panic and chaos. Counselor Vresh found herself in an emergency meeting with Security Commander Draxel late one night. We need to adapt our strategies quickly. What made the humans so effective against threats like the swarm in the old records? Draxel pulled up archived footage of human military operations from various conflicts over the years. Aggression and unpredictability were their main advantages. They did not wait for the enemy to come to them. They hunted their enemies down. They used tactics we have always considered barbaric, including preemptive strikes and guerrilla warfare, and psychological operations against enemy morale. Barbaric tactics, Fresh repeated with bitter irony in her voice. And now we are dying because we were too civilized and too peaceful to defend ourselves properly. The swarm attacks continued to escalate with each passing day bringing worse news. Entire sectors of Council space went completely dark and silent. Billions of refugees fled toward the core worlds, straining resources and infrastructure to the breaking point. The Council's carefully maintained peace and prosperity was crumbling under the weight of an ancient threat they were completely unprepared to face. In the depths of space far from Council territory, Admiral Karen Wright received regular intelligence updates from hidden sources. Human monitoring stations, automated and hidden throughout Council space, were still operational and still watching everything. She saw every battle and every defeat. Admiral, Scott said carefully while reviewing casualty reports. They are being slaughtered out there. Entire populations are being wiped out. I know, Karen replied quietly. We could intervene right now. Just our border fleets alone would make a significant difference in the fighting. Karen was silent for a long moment before responding. Have they asked us for help yet? No, ma'am, they have not. Then we hold our position and wait, Karen said with iron in her voice. They wanted us gone from their space. They have to live with that choice and its consequences. But alone in her quarters that night, Karen stared at the mounting casualty reports and wondered how long she could maintain that position. How many more innocent civilians would have to die before pride became completely irrelevant? The answer would come sooner than anyone expected. The transmission arrived on a coded human frequency that had not been used in months, and it woke Ambassador Helen Carter in the middle of her sleep cycle. She wrapped a robe around herself and stumbled to her communications terminal, wondering who would contact her at this hour. Using old council protocols, Kaleth appeared on the screen looking exhausted, and his scales were dull with stress and lack of proper rest. Ambassador Carter, I hope this message finds you well and that you will hear what I have to say. It does find me, Helen replied with a carefully neutral voice that gave away nothing of her thoughts or feelings. The council is dying slowly, Kaleth said bluntly without any diplomatic pleasantries or evasions. The swarm has taken 47 colonies in just a few months. Our projected casualties are in the hundreds of billions if current trends continue at this rate. Our military forces are completely inadequate for this level of threat. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was heavy with shame and desperation. We were wrong about everything regarding your species. We need your help. Is this an official request from the Galactic Council as a whole? Helen asked. No, it is not official, Kaleth admitted, and his honesty was painful to hear in his voice. The Council is still debating what to do among themselves. High Arbiter Zexthor believes we can still prevail with our own forces if we adjust our tactics. Councillor Vresh wants to negotiate for peace with the swarm, even though all historical records show such attempts are completely futile. I am reaching out to you personally as someone who voted against your expulsion from Council space. Helen studied the Zenthari ambassador for a long moment before responding. What exactly are you asking humanity to do for the Council? We need military assistance and strategic planning expertise, Kaleth explained. The humans fought the swarm 300 years ago according to our records. Your species maintained those defensive positions that we now realize were protecting all of us from this threat. We desperately need that knowledge and that military expertise. That dangerous militarism that you expelled us for, Helen said, and there was an edge to her voice. Yes, exactly that. Kaleth did not flinch from the accusation in her words. We were complete fools, Ambassador. We mistook your vigilance for aggression and your preparation for conquest. We are paying a terrible price for that foolishness right now. Helen was silent as her mind raced through calculations and political considerations. I will present your request to our leadership council. But Kaleth, you should know something important. Even if we agree to help you, it will not be free of cost. Name your terms and we will consider them. Not terms exactly. Helen leaned forward toward the screen. Consequences is a better word. You forced us to dismantle our homes and uproot our children and abandon years of hard work. You made us refugees in our own galaxy. If we save you now, the relationship between humanity and the Council will never be what it was before. There will be prices to pay, and not all of them will be financial or territorial in nature. Kaleth nodded slowly with understanding in his eyes. I understand what you are saying, and still I ask for your help because we have no other choice. The transmission ended, and Helen immediately began sending emergency messages to convene a meeting of human leadership. Representatives from every colony and military commanders and civilian administrators, all connected through secure channels. The debate that followed was intense and raged for hours. Let them burn in the fires they created, argued Governor Frank Lewis of the Arcturus colony with barely controlled rage. My daughter was born on that council world. She cried for weeks after we were forced to leave. Why should we risk human lives for people who treated us like criminals? Because we are better than that, countered Admiral Karen Wright firmly. We do not let innocent people die out of spite or revenge. It is not spite, Frank shot back angrily. It is justice and consequences. They made their choice freely. Let them live with it, or die with it. Helen let the arguments flow back and forth while watching the faces on the holographic display carefully. Eventually, she raised her hand for silence and everyone stopped talking. Let me ask a different question that changes the perspective, Helen said calmly. What serves humanity's long-term interests best? A galaxy where the Council collapses completely, and the swarm expands unchecked into all known space. Or a galaxy where the Council survives but owes us a debt so profound they will never forget it? That single question changed the entire tenor of the discussion immediately. People began looking at the situation differently. Slowly and gradually, a consensus began to emerge from the chaos. We help them, Helen concluded after listening to enough opinions. But we do it on our complete terms. Full access to Council space for all human ships, a formal apology and reversal of the expulsion order, permanent human seats on the Council with full voting rights, and most importantly, we run all military operations completely. No Council oversight, no second guessing, no committees slowing us down. They put themselves entirely in our hands or we walk away. The vote was close, but it passed with a small majority. Helen composed her response to Colette carefully. But before she could send the message, a second transmission arrived on official Council channels. High Arbiter Zex Thor appeared on the screen, and his crystalline form looked somehow smaller and diminished. Behind him stood the entire Council assembly looking defeated. Ambassador Carter, I speak on behalf of the Galactic Council as its leader. We have made grave errors in judgment. We allowed fear to override reason and wisdom. We cast out a valuable ally and now find ourselves defenseless against an ancient enemy. We formally request military assistance from humanity in repelling the Void Swarm invasion. We are prepared to discuss terms. Helen allowed herself a small cold smile. Terms have already been prepared, High Arbiter. I will transmit them to you right now. You have 12 hours to respond. The Council's response came back in 10 hours. All terms were accepted without negotiation or changes. Admiral Karen Wright immediately mobilized the Human Defense Coalition forces. Ships that had been on standby for months roared to life. Soldiers who had been farming on frontier worlds put on their uniforms once more. Logistics chains that had been carefully maintained despite the exile snapped into full action. Within 48 hours, the first human fleet crossed back into Council space. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UNS Frontier as they passed through the border checkpoint. The Council station that had once processed their sad departure now watched silently as humanity returned. Status report, Jake ordered crisply. Lieutenant Amy Hughes consulted her displays quickly. Council forces have established a defensive line at the Helios cluster. It is barely holding. Swarm forces are estimated at 3,000 capital ships with support craft numbering in the hundreds of thousands. And our forces? Jake asked. First Fleet has 800 capital ships with full support wings. Second and third fleets are 6 hours behind us. Combined human forces will total approximately 1,500 capital ships. The numbers were sobering, and everyone on the bridge understood what they meant. Humanity was outnumbered 2-1 while defending a government that had exiled them. All ships, this is Morrison, Jake transmitted to the entire fleet. I know what you are thinking and feeling right now. But remember this clearly. We are not fighting for the Council or their gratitude. We are fighting to stop the swarm. We are fighting because if we do not stop them here, the enemy will grow stronger and eventually come for us. And we are fighting to prove something important. That humanity keeps its word and honors its principles even when others fail to do the same. Make me proud. Morrison out. The human fleet accelerated toward the front lines. In the depths of space, the Void Swarm sensed the newcomers approaching and recognized them from ancient genetic memory. The humans had returned to the fight. The Battle of Helios Cluster would be remembered as the moment when everything changed in the war against the Void Swarm. Admiral Karen Wright commanded from the UNS Defiance, her flagship positioned at the center of the human formation while, surrounding her were the remnants of the Council defensive fleet looking, battered and demoralized and on the very edge of. Breaking Council Commander Direx is hailing us, reported Communications Officer Lisa Martinez. Put him through, Karen said calmly. The insectoid commander appeared on the screen and his compound eyes reflected pure exhaustion. Admiral Wright, my forces are at 30% combat effectiveness. We have held this position for 6 days, but we cannot withstand another major assault. You will not have to hold alone anymore. Karen's voice was steady and confident. Pull your ships back to secondary defensive positions. Let us take point now. Admiral, with all respect, your forces are significantly outnumbered by the enemy. Direx began. Commander, you asked for our help, Karen interrupted firmly. Now let us help you. Stand down and observe how humans fight. Direx hesitated for only a moment before nodding. The Council ships began withdrawing to positions behind the human fleet. and Karen could practically feel their relief and hope. "All ships assume battle formation Delta 7, she ordered crisply. "Launch all fighter wings. Prepare quantum mines for deployment. Target coordinates are being transmitted to all vessels now." The Void Swarm approached in their typical attack pattern, a massive wave of bioships designed to overwhelm through sheer numbers and relentless pressure. It was a tactic that had worked perfectly against Council forces for months. It would not work against humans. "Execute," Karen said with deadly calm. The human fleet split smoothly into 3 prongs, and each section moved with precision that made the Council observers gasp in amazement. The swarm's formation began to adjust to the new threat, but it was too slow and too predictable. The quantum mines detonated in carefully calculated patterns throughout space, creating gaps in the swarm formation. Human fighters poured through those gaps like predators hunting prey, targeting command ships with ruthless efficiency. Colonel Danny Ross led his fighter wing personally through the chaos. "Echo Squadron, take out those biogenerators. Tango Squadron, provide cover. Move now." The human pilots flew with an aggression that bordered on reckless, but every single maneuver was calculated, and every risk was carefully measured. They did not fight just to survive. They fought to win decisively. On the Defiance Bridge, Lieutenant Commander Ryan Cooper monitored the tactical display with intense focus. "Ma'am, swarm forces are attempting to envelop our left flank position." "Let them try," Karen said and opened a secure channel. "Captain Stone, they are coming your way exactly as planned." Melissa Stone, commanding the UNS Vengeance, smiled grimly at the news. "Confirmed, Admiral. Setting the trap now." The human ships on the left flank appeared to falter and fall back in what looked like complete disorder. The swarm, sensing what appeared to be weakness, committed additional forces to exploit the apparent gap. It was exactly what Melissa wanted them to do. Now, she barked into the comm, hidden behind a small moon. 20 human destroyers emerged at full speed and opened fire at point-blank range. Simultaneously, the retreating ships reversed course and attacked with everything they had. The swarm forces found themselves caught in a devastating crossfire. Within minutes, 300 enemy ships were reduced to floating debris and scattered remains. Commander D-Rex watched in stunned silence from his position. "They are not just fighting," he said quietly to his aide. "They are hunting like predators." The battle raged for 18 brutal hours without pause. The human forces pressed their advantage relentlessly and gave the swarm no time to regroup or adapt to new tactics. They employed strategies that made Council observers deeply uncomfortable, targeting wounded ships to prevent them from regenerating, using psychological warfare through specific broadcast frequencies, and even turning captured swarm ships against each other through hacked control signals. When the battle finally ended, the swarm had lost 70% of its forces in the entire sector. The remaining ships fled into deep space in complete disarray. Human casualties were severe but manageable. 3 capital ships destroyed, 17 fighters lost, and 843 personnel killed. The Council had been prepared to lose everything in this battle. The humans had turned what seemed like inevitable defeat into a decisive and crushing victory. Admiral Wright addressed the combined fleet over open channels. "This is what we do. This is why we train hard and why we stay vigilant and why we never forget that peace is only possible when good people are willing to fight for it. To all Council forces, welcome to the human way of war." News of the stunning victory spread rapidly through Council space like wildfire. Hope, which had been dying slowly over months of constant defeats, suddenly blazed back to life in every system. But everyone understood the war was far from over. In the Council chambers, High Arbiter Zexthor convened an emergency strategy session. Human military advisors now sat at the main table alongside Council strategists for the first time in history. "The swarm will adapt to our tactics," warned Colonel Danny Ross seriously. "That is what they do best. We have maybe 2 weeks before they adjust their strategies to counter ours. Then we do not give them 2 weeks to prepare," Helen Carter said firmly. She had returned to Council space as Earth's official ambassador and chief liaison. "We go on the offensive immediately. We take the fight directly to them." Councillor Vresh's tentacles writhed nervously. "That is extremely aggressive. Our traditional doctrine has always been defensive in nature. Your doctrine got billions of people killed," Helen interrupted, and her voice was sharp. "No disrespect intended, Counselor, but it is time to accept that your way was not working. The swarm does not negotiate or compromise. It does not retreat unless forced. The only way to stop it permanently is to hunt it down and destroy it completely. Kaleth spoke up carefully. What exactly do you propose we do? Karen Wright stepped forward and activated a holographic star map. Intelligence suggests the swarm has a central hive structure in the darkness beyond in this region. She pointed to an area of space marked in red. It is heavily defended and located in deep space, but if we can destroy it, we decapitate their entire command structure. That is essentially a one-way trip, Durex observed grimly. No fleet in history has ever returned from the darkness. No Council fleet has returned, Jake Morrison corrected him. Humanity's 5th Fleet specializes in deep space operations. We can get there, and get back, Durex asked. We will figure that out when we get there, Jake said simply. The plan was audacious, and some Council members said it was completely insane. A strike force of 300 human ships would push deep into the darkness beyond, locate the swarm hive and destroy it permanently. Council forces would maintain defensive positions and deal with any swarm elements that tried to flee or launch counterattacks. It is suicide, Fresh said flatly. Maybe it is. Jake agreed without hesitation. But it is also our best chance to end this war. The swarm has been fighting defensively since Helios. They are regrouping right now. If we wait for them, they will come back stronger than before. We end this threat now while we have momentum. The Council voted on the plan. It was approved by a narrow margin. 3 days later, Task Force Vengeance, consisting of 300 human ships crewed entirely by volunteers, departed for the darkness beyond. Admiral Karen Wright remained behind to coordinate the overall defense, but she personally handpicked the task force commander, Captain Jake Morrison. As the fleet prepared to jump into unknown space, Jake received a final transmission from Earth. His wife Claire appeared on the screen with their 2 daughters standing beside her. Come home to us, Claire said simply with tears in her eyes. I will, Jake promised. Take care of the girls, take care of yourself, Claire's voice broke slightly. Show them what happens when you push humanity too far. The transmission ended. Jake turned to face his crew on the bridge. All ships, this is Morrison. We have been underestimated and dismissed and exiled from Council space. Today we remind the galaxy why that was a terrible mistake. Today we end this war. Today we show them what humans do when someone threatens our home, even if that home cast us out. For Earth, for the fallen, for every person who believed we were monsters. He paused and then added quietly, let us prove them right about our strength. Task Force Vengeance jumped into the darkness, and the swarm realized too late that they had made a fatal mistake by allowing the humans to return. The darkness beyond was a region of space where stars died slowly and their feeble light barely penetrated. The clouds of cosmic dust and ancient debris. It was here, hidden from the civilized galaxy, that the Void Swarm had been rebuilding its forces for 3 centuries while waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Captain, Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UNS Frontier watching the scanner displays as Task Force Vengeance pushed deeper into uncharted space. Around him, his crew worked with quiet efficiency, and each person knew they might not return home from this mission. Contact, Amy Hughes announced in a steady voice. Multiple swarm signatures detected at distance 8 million kilometers. They are not running away from us. They do not need to run, Commander Peter Logan said while pulling up tactical data. These are their home territories. They have every advantage here except one. Except one, Jake agreed. They are fighting humans now. The first engagement came quickly and without warning. Swarm bioships emerged from behind a dying star, and their organic hulls pulsed with unnatural life. The human formation shifted smoothly with ships moving in, coordinated patterns that seemed almost choreographed. Colonel Danny Ross led the fighter screen, personally, and his pilots weaved through enemy fire with practiced skill. All wings target those nerve clusters, make them feel every hit. The human weapons had been specifically modified for this mission over the past weeks. Plasma torpedoes were calibrated to disrupt swarm biology. Railguns were loaded with crystalline rounds that shattered organic armor, and specialized missiles carried biological agents that humanity had developed specifically to counter swarm regeneration abilities. It was a level of preparation that shocked even the humans who had designed these weapons. Humanity had spent decades quietly studying the swarm, analyzing every historical record and every piece of recovered technology. Now that accumulated knowledge was being put to Devastating use against an enemy that had never faced such focused opposition. The swarm fought back with savage ferocity, but for the first time in the war, they were facing an enemy that truly understood them. Every tactic they employed had a prepared counter. Every adaptation was met with a counter-adaptation. "They are terrified," Amy said suddenly while studying the bio-readings on her screen. "Look at their movement patterns. They are not following standard swarm doctrine anymore." She was absolutely right. The enemy ships were hesitating and falling back and breaking formation. The swarm had never encountered an opponent that not only matched their aggression, but exceeded it with cold calculation. Jake opened a channel to the entire fleet. "All ships execute full advance." We are not giving them any time to think or adapt. The human fleet pushed forward like a spear thrust, leaving destroyed swarm vessels floating in their wake. They fought through 3 defensive perimeters, and each one was more heavily fortified than the last. Back in Council space, Admiral Karen Wright monitored the battle reports with growing tension. The task force was taking casualties with 20 ships lost and thousands of personnel killed, but they were advancing steadily toward their objective. "Ma'am, Council Command is requesting an update on the mission," Lisa Martinez reported. Karen opened the channel. High Arbiter Zexthor appeared, and his crystalline form looked somehow more transparent than before. "Admiral, your forces are taking very heavy losses. Perhaps a tactical withdrawal would be wise at this point." "No." Karen's voice was flat and absolute. "We are committed to this mission. Either we win or we die trying. There is no middle ground. That is completely insane." "That is human," Karen replied simply. In the darkness beyond, the task force finally reached their objective after days of brutal fighting. The Hive Mother was a massive bioconstruct the size of a small moon that pulsed with sickly light. It was surrounded by thousands of swarm vessels in defensive formations. "That is a lot of enemies," Peter observed with deliberate understatement. "Good," Jake replied. "It means we are in exactly the right place. All ships assume battle formation Omega. This is what we came here to do." What followed was the most brutal combat of the entire war. Human ships pressed the attack despite overwhelming odds, and their crews fought with a desperation born of knowing this was the final moment. There would be no retreat and no second chances. Melissa Stone's ship, the Vengeance, took heavy damage early in the battle. Half her crew was dead, her engines were failing, and hull breaches were venting precious atmosphere into space. She refused to fall back or withdraw. "All hands, this is the captain speaking," Melissa announced over the ship-wide intercom. "We are not leaving until that hive is destroyed. Redirect all power to weapons. Life support to minimum levels. If we are going down, then we are taking them with us." Her crew, battered and bleeding and exhausted, responded with grim determination. The Vengeance became a missile, driving straight toward the Hive Mother with all weapons blazing. Danny Ross and his fighter squadrons flew directly into the Hive's defensive structures while targeting the biological support systems. They took catastrophic losses with 50% casualties in the first hour, but they did not stop or slow down. For everyone we lost, Danny screamed into the comm while firing his weapons. For everyone they took from us, make them pay for every second. Jake coordinated the entire assault with cold precision, moving pieces across the tactical board like a master playing chess with lives. He sacrificed damaged ships to create openings, used crippled vessels as decoys, and ordered desperate maneuvers that would have been unthinkable in any normal battle. But this was not a normal battle. This was humanity's response to being exiled and dismissed and underestimated. This was what happened when you forced humans to leave. The turning point came when the Vengeance, crippled and dying, managed to punch through the Hive's outer defenses. Melissa Stone, bleeding from a dozen wounds, stood on her smoke-filled bridge and gave one final order. "Set reactor to overload. Ram that thing with everything we have left." Her crew did not hesitate or question. The Vengeance accelerated on its last reserves of power and drove directly into the Hive Mother's core. The resulting explosion created a massive chain reaction that tore through the structure's biological systems. The Hive Mother screamed with a psychic wail that echoed across space and began to die. "All ships, concentrate all fire on the breach," Jake ordered. "Finish it now." The human fleet poured everything they had into the wound the Vengeance had created. Torpedoes and missiles and railgun rounds and plasma bursts all hammered into the dying Hive without mercy. When it finally collapsed, The explosion lit up the darkness beyond like a new sun being born. The swarm forces, suddenly leaderless and disoriented, scattered in every direction. The human task force, reduced to less than 100 ships, limped after them and hunted down the survivors with methodical efficiency. It took another week to secure the entire region. When it was finally done, the Void Swarm had been effectively eliminated as a galactic threat. Small pockets remained scattered, but without their hive structure, they were little more than animals. The cost had been severe and terrible. Of the 300 ships that had entered the darkness beyond, only 98 returned home. 40,000 human personnel had died in the campaign, but they had won. When Task Force Vengeance finally limped back into Council space, they were met by a fleet of ships from every Council species. Admiral Karen Wright's voice crackled over the comm with emotion. "Task Force Vengeance, this is Admiral Wright. Welcome home, heroes. You just saved the galaxy." Jake Morrison, exhausted and haunted by the faces of those who had not returned, could only nod silently. In the council chambers, a special session convened. Every species was represented. For the first time in recorded history, the chambers were completely silent as Ambassador Helen Carter approached the central podium. High Arbiter Zexathor stood and bowed deeply, a gesture of profound respect in his culture. "Ambassador Carter, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I offer our deepest gratitude and our sincerest apologies. We were wrong about humanity. We judged your strength as aggression and your vigilance as paranoia and your capability as threat. We see now that you were protecting us all along. We see now what it cost you to do so." Helen looked out at the assembled representatives. "We came in peace. You forced us to leave. We could have abandoned you to your fate. Instead, we returned and bled for you. 40,000 humans died to save a civilization that had exiled them. I want you to remember that. I want every species in this chamber to understand what humanity is truly capable of, not our capacity for violence, which you now understand, but our capacity for forgiveness." She paused and let the words sink in. "But forgiveness is not forgetfulness. The terms we set will stand. Humanity will have permanent seats on this council. We will have free access to all council space. And most importantly, you will never again dismiss our warnings or our counsel. Because the next time something comes out of the dark, we might not be so willing to save you." The council voted unanimously to ratify all terms. Human colonies were re-established and families returned to their homes. The galaxy entered a new era where humanity's place was secure. 3 months later, Jake Morrison stood in the memorial garden on Earth looking at the wall of names. 40,000 souls who had died in the darkness beyond. His wife Claire stood beside him while their daughters played nearby. "Was it worth it?" she asked quietly. Jake thought about that question for a long moment. "They forced us to leave. We warned them what would happen. They faced the consequences. But we also showed them something else. That humanity does not abandon its principles even when others abandon us. So yes, it was worth it, because now they know who we really are." The sun was setting over Earth, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. In the distance, the first of the new defensive stations was visible as a reminder that humanity would never again be caught unprepared. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Humanity had forced them to learn it, and they would never forget.